The story of Ahalya. Lord, the mind alone is the creator of the world, and the mind alone is the supreme person. What is done by the mind is action. What is done by the body is not action. Behold the powers of the mind. By determined thinking, the sons of the holy man became creators of the universe. When one, on the other hand, thinks, I am a little body, he becomes a mortal being. One whose consciousness is extroverted experiences pleasure and pain. On the other hand, the yogi whose vision is introverted does not entertain ideas of pain and pleasure. In this connection there is a legend which I shall narrate to you. In the country of Magadha, there was a king named Indradayumna. Ahalya was his wife. In that place was also a handsome young man of loose morals known as Indra. One day, during a discourse, the queen listened to the seduction story of the fame Ahalya by Indra, the king of heaven. As a result, she conceived a great love for the young man Indra. Ahalya was distraught with love for Indra, and with the help of one of her maids managed to have the young man brought to her. From then onwards, Indra and Ahalya used to meet each other in a secret house and enjoy themselves. Ahalya was so fond of Indra that she saw him everywhere. The very thought of him made her face radiant. As their love grew, their relationship became public, and it reached the king's ears. The irate king, in an effort to break this relationship, punished them in numerous ways. They were immersed in ice-cold water. They were fried in boiling oil. They were tied to the legs of an elephant. They were whipped. Indra said to the king laughingly, O king, the entire universe to me is nothing but my beloved. So it is to Ahalya. Hence we are unaffected by these. Sir, I am only mind, and mind alone is the individual. You punish the body, but you cannot punish the mind nor bring about the least change in it. If the mind is fully saturated with something, whatever happens to the body does not affect the mind. The mind is unaffected even by boons and curses, even as the firmly established mountain is not moved by the horns of a little beast. The body does not create the mind, but the mind creates the body. The mind alone is the seed for the body. When the tree dies, the seed does not, but when the seed perishes, the tree dies with it. If the body perishes, the mind can create other bodies for itself. Lord the king thereupon approached the sage Bharata and pleaded that he should punish the recalcitrant couple by cursing them. The sage pronounced a curse upon the couple. However, they said to the sage and to the king, Alas, you are both of little understanding. By thus cursing us, you have squandered the merit acquired by penance. Your curse will surely destroy our bodies, but we shall lose nothing by that. No one can destroy the minds of others. However, the sage's curse destroyed their bodies, and on leaving those bodies they were born together as animals, and then as birds, and then as a human couple in a holy family. Till now, on account of the total love for each other, they are born together as husband and wife. Even the trees of the forest were inspired and infected by the supreme love and devotion of this couple. Even the sage's curse could not bring about the mutation of the couple's mind. Even so, Lord, you cannot interfere with the creation of the 10 sons of the holy man. But what do you lose if they are thus engaged in their own creation? Let them remain with the creations of their own mind. It cannot be destroyed by you, any more than the reflection in crystal can be removed. Lord, in your own consciousness, create the world as you like. In truth, the infinite consciousness, the mind, one's own consciousness, and the infinite space are all of one substance, pervaded by the infinite consciousness. Therefore, regardless of what the young men have created, you can create as many worlds as you like. Brahma said to Vasishta, "Having listened to this advice of the sun, I immediately began to create the worlds as the natural expression of my own being. I requested the sun to be my first partner in this task. Thus, he was the sun in the creation of the young men, and the progenitor of the human race in my creation, and he played this dual role efficiently. In accordance with my intentions, he brought about the creation of the worlds. Whatever appears in one's consciousness, that seems to come into being, gets established, and even bears fruits. Such is the power of the mind. Just as the sons of the holy man gain the position of creators of the world on account of the powers of their mind, even so have I become the creator of the world. It is the mind that makes things appear here. It brings about the appearance of the body. Nothing else is aware of the body. The creator, Brahma, the individualized consciousness mind, has in its own manifold potentialities, even as spices have taste in them. That consciousness itself appears as the subtle or ethereal body, and when it becomes gross, that itself appears to be the physical or material body. That individualized consciousness itself is known as the jiva or the individual soul. When the potentialities are in an extremely subtle state, and when all this jugglery of the jiva ceases, that itself shines as the Supreme Being. I am not, nor is there anyone in this universe. All this is nothing but the infinite consciousness. Just as the intention of the young men became manifest, all this is appearance based on infinite consciousness. The young men's intention made them feel that they were the creators. Even so am I. The pure and infinite consciousness alone thinks of itself as the jiva and as the mind, and then believes itself to be the body. When this dreamlike fantasy is prolonged, this long dream feels like reality. It is both real and unreal. Because it is perceived, it appears to be real. But because of inherent contradiction, it is unreal. The mind is sentient because it is based on consciousness. When viewed as something apart from consciousness, it is inert and deluded. When there is perception, the mind takes on the role of the object of perception, but not in reality. Even as when it is perceived as such, the bracelet is seen, though in truth it is gold. Because Brahman alone is all this, even what is inert is pure consciousness. But all of us, from me down to the rock, are indefinable, neither inert nor sentient. There can be no apprehension of two completely different things. Only when there is similarity between the subject and object is perception possible. Concerning what is indefinable and whose existence is not certain, inert and sentient are only words with no substance. In the mind, the subject is believed to be sentient and the object is said to be inert. Thus caught in delusion, the jiva hangs around. In truth, this duality itself is the creation of the mind, an hallucination. Of course, we cannot determine with certainty that such an hallucination exists either. The infinite consciousness alone is. When this illusory division is not seen for what it is, there is the arising of the false egotism. But when the mind inquires into its own nature, this division disappears. There is realization of the one infinite consciousness, and one attains great bliss. Vasishta asked Brahma, "Lord, how is it possible that the sage's curse affected Indra's body and not his mind? If the body is not different from the mind, then the curse should affect the mind too. kindly explain to me how the mind is not thus affected, or that it is affected. Dear one, in the universe from Brahma to a hill, every embodied being has a twofold body. Of these, the first is the mental body, which is restless and which acts quickly. The second is the body made of flesh, which does not really do anything. Of these, the latter is overpowered by curses and also by boons or charms. It is dumb, powerless, weak, and transient like a droplet of water on a lotus leaf. And it is entirely dependent upon fate, destiny, and such other factors. Mind, however, is independent, though it might seem to be dependent. When this mind confidently engages in self-effort, then it is beyond the reach of sorrow. Whenever it strives, then and there it surely finds the fruition of its striving. The physical body achieves nothing. On the other hand, the mental body gets results. When the mind dwells constantly on what is pure, it is immune to the effects of curses. The body may fall into fire or mire, but the mind experiences only that which it contemplates. This was demonstrated by Indra. It was also demonstrated by the sage Dirgatapa, who wished to perform a religious rite but fell into a blind well while collecting the materials for it. He performed the rite mentally and derived the fruit of actual physical performance of the rite. The 10 sons of the holy man were also able to achieve Brahmahood by their mental effort. Even I could not prevent it. Mental and physical illness, as well as curses and evil eye, do not touch the mind that is devoted to the self, any more than a lotus flower can split a rock into two by falling on it. Hence, one should endeavor with the mind to make the mind take to the pure path. With the self, make the self tread the path of purity. Whatever the mind contemplates, that instantly materializes. By intense contemplation, it can bring about radical change within itself, to heal itself of the defective vision in which illusions were perceived as real. What the mind does, that it experiences as truth. It makes the man who is sitting in moonlight experience burning heat, and it makes one who is in burning sun experience cool comfort. Such is the mysterious power of the mind. Vasishta. Since the absolute Brahman in its undifferentiated state pervades everything, everything is in an undifferentiated state. When that of its own accord condenses, the cosmic mind is born. In that mind there arises the intention of the existence of the different elements in their extremely subtle state. The totality of all this is the luminous cosmic person who is known as Brahma, the Creator. Hence, this Creator is none other than the cosmic mind. O Rama, all objects and substances in this universe have emerged in Brahman, the Absolute, just as waves manifest in the ocean. In this uncreated universe, the mind of Brahma, the Creator, perceives itself as the egotism, and thus does Brahma, the cosmic mind, become Brahma, the Creator of the universe. The power of that cosmic mind alone appears to be the diverse forces in the universe. Infinite numbers of diverse creatures manifest themselves in this cosmic mind, and they are then known as diverse jiva. When these diverse jiva arise in the infinite space of consciousness, seemingly composed of the elements, into each of the bodies consciousness enters through the aperture of life force, and then forms the seat of all bodies, both moving and unmoving. Then birth as individuals takes place, each individual being accidentally, like a crow alighting and a coconut falling, brought into contact with different potentialities whose expression gives rise to the law of cause and effect. And then, to rise and fall in evolution. Desire alone is thereafter the cause of all this. O Rama, such is this forest known as world appearance. He who cuts its very root with the act of investigation, inquiry, is freed from it. Some arrive at this understanding soon, others after a very long time. O Rama, I shall now describe to you the divisions of beings into the best, the worst, and the middling, as it happened in the beginning of this cycle of creation. The first and foremost among the creatures are born of noble practices. They are naturally good and devoted to good deeds. They reach liberation in a few lifetimes. They are full of the quality of purity and light, sattva. The middling type are the ones who are full of the quality of dynamism and desire, rajas. When such people are close enough to liberation that on their departure from this world they reach it, they have a mixture of rajas and sattva. They who even after 1,000 births are still in darkness, unawakened, are known as beings of darkness, tamas. They may take a long time to reach liberation. By the will of the infinite Brahman, all these beings seem to arise and then dissolve into it. When the cosmic mind manifested itself in the absolute Brahman, at that very instant the natural tendencies of diverse beings and their behavior were born, and the embodied beings came to be regarded as jiva. There is no division between mind and action. Before it is projected as action, it arises in the mind, with the mind itself as its body. Hence, action is nothing but the movement of energy and consciousness, and it inevitably bears its own fruit. When such action comes to an end, mind comes to an end too, and when the mind ceases to be, there is no action. This applies only to the liberated sage, not to the others. Mind is the only perception, and perception is movement in consciousness. The expression of this movement is action, and fruition follows this. Whatever the mind thinks of, the organs of action strive to materialize. Hence again, mind is action. However, mind, intellect, egotism, individualized consciousness, action, fancy, birth, death, latent tendencies, knowledge, effort, memory, the senses, nature, maya, or illusion, activity, and such other words are but words without corresponding reality. The sole reality is the infinite consciousness in which these concepts are conceived to exist. All these concepts have arisen when, by accidental coincidence, the crow dislodging the coconut, infinite consciousness in a moment of self-forgetfulness viewed itself as the object of perception. When thus veiled by nescience, the same consciousness views diversity in an agitated state and identifies objects as such, it is known as mind. When it is firmly established in the conviction of a certain perception, it is known as intellect or intelligence. When it ignorantly and foolishly identifies itself as an existent separate individual, it is known as egotism. When it abandons consistent inquiry, allowing itself to play with countless thoughts coming and going, it is known as individualized consciousness, or mind stuff. Whereas pure movement in consciousness is karma, or action without an independent doer, when it pursues the fruition of such action, it is known as karma, action. When it entertains the notion, I have seen this before, in relation to something either seen or unseen, it is known as memory. When the effects of past enjoyments continue to remain in the field of consciousness, though the effects themselves are unseen, it is known as latent tendency, or potentiality. When it is conscious of the truth that the vision of division is the product of ignorance, it is known as knowledge. On the other hand, when it moves in the wrong direction towards greater self-forgetfulness and deeper involvement in false fancies, it is known as impurity. When it entertains the indweller with sensations, it is known as the senses, indriya. When it remains unmanifest in the cosmic being, it is known as nature. When it creates confusion between reality and appearance, it is known as maya, illusion. When it dissolves in the infinite, there is liberation. When it thinks, I am bound, there is bondage. When it thinks, I am free, there is freedom. Rama. Space is threefold: the infinite space of undivided consciousness, the finite space of divided consciousness, and the physical space in which the material world exists. The infinite space of undivided consciousness, Chidakasha, is that which exists in all, inside and outside, as the pure witness of that which is real and of that which appears to be. The finite space of divided consciousness, Chidakasha, is that which creates the divisions of time which pervades all beings, and which is interested in the welfare of all beings. The physical space is that in which the other elements, air, etc., exist. The latter two are not independent of the first. In fact, the others do not exist. The story of the great forest. O Rama, whatever might have been the origin of the mind, and whatever it might be, one should constantly direct it towards liberation through self-effort. The pure mind is free from latent tendencies, and therefore it attains self-knowledge. Since the entire universe is within the mind, the notions of bondage and liberation are also within it. In this connection, there is the following legend which I heard from the Creator Brahma himself. Listen to it attentively. There was a great forest, so large that in it millions of square miles were like the space within an atom. In it there was just one person, who had 1,000 arms and limbs. He was forever restless. He had a mace in his hand with which he beat himself, and afraid of the beating he ran away in panic. He fell into a blind well. He came out of it. Again he beat himself, and again ran away in panic. This time into a forest. He came out of it, again beat himself, and ran away in panic, and this time into a banana grove. Though there was no other being to fear, he wept and cried aloud in fear. He kept running as before, beating himself as before. I witnessed all this intuitively, and with the power of my will I restrained him for a moment. I asked him, "Who are you?" But he was sorely distressed and called me his enemy, and wept aloud and then laughed aloud. Then he began to abandon his body limb by limb. Immediately after this, I saw another person running like the first one, beating himself, weeping and wailing. When I similarly restrained him, he began to abuse me and ran away, intent on his own way of life. Like this, I came across several persons. Some listened to my words, and abandoning their previous way of life, became enlightened. Some others ignored me or even held me in contempt. Some others even refused to come out of the blind well or the dense forest. Such is the great forest, O Rama. No one finds a sure resting place in it, whatever be the mode of life they may adopt. Even today you see such people in this world, and you, yourself, have seen such a life of ignorance and delusion. Because you are young and ignorant, you do not understand it. O Rama, this great forest is not far away, nor is that strange man in a strange land. The world itself is the forest. It is a great void, but this void is seen only in the light of inquiry. This light of inquiry is the I in the parable. This wisdom is accepted by some and rejected by others, who continue to suffer. They who accept it are enlightened. The person with thousands of arms is the mind with countless manifestations. This mind punishes itself by its own latent tendencies and restlessly wanders in this world. The blind well in the story is hell, and the banana grove is heaven. The dense forest of thorny bush is the life of a worldly man, with the numerous thorns of wife, children, wealth, etc., hurting him all the time. The mind now wanders into hell, now into heaven, and now into the world of human beings. Even when the light of wisdom shines on the life of the deluded mind, it foolishly rejects it, considering that that wisdom is its enemy. Then it weeps and wails in distress. Sometimes it experiences an imperfect awakening, and it renounces the pleasures of the world without proper understanding. Such renunciation itself proves to be a great source of sorrow. But when such renunciation arises out of the fullness of understanding, of wisdom born of inquiry into the nature of the mind, the renunciation leads to supreme bliss. Such a mind may even look at its own past notions of pleasure with puzzlement, just as the limbs of the person as they were cut away fell down and disappeared. The latent tendencies of the person who wisely renounces the world also vanish from the mind. Behold, the play of ignorance which makes one hurt oneself out of one's own volition, and which makes one run hither and thither in meaningless panic. When one who gains wisdom preserves it for a long time and persists in the practice of inquiry, he does not experience sorrow. An uncontrolled mind is the source of sorrow. When it is thoroughly understood, the story vanishes like mist at sunrise. The absolute Brahman is omnipotent. There is nothing which is outside of it. It is his own power or energy that pervades all things. In embodied beings, it is the Chit Shakti, the power of consciousness or intelligence. It is motion in air, stability in earth, void in space, and it is the power of self-consciousness, I am, in created beings. Yet all this is nothing but the power of absolute Brahman. The instruments of action and the doer, birth, death, and existence, all this is Brahman. Nothing else is, even in imagination. Delusion, craving, greed, and attachment are non-existent. How can they exist when there is no duality? When bondage is non-existent, surely liberation is false too. The story of the non-existent princes. To illustrate this, there is an interesting legend. Kindly listen to it. A young boy asked his nanny to tell him a story, and the nanny told him the following story, to which the boy listened with great attention. Once upon a time, in a city which did not exist, there were 3 princes who were brave and happy. Of them 2 were unborn, and the third had not been conceived. Unfortunately, all their relatives died. The princes left their native city to go elsewhere. Very soon, unable to bear the heat of the sun, they fell into a swoon. Their feet were burnt by hot sand. The tips of grass pierced them. They reached the shade of 3 trees, of which 2 did not exist, and the third had not even been planted. After resting there for some time and eating the fruits of those trees, they proceeded further. They reached the banks of 3 rivers. Of them 2 were dry, and in the third there was no water. The princes had a refreshing bath and quenched their thirst in them. They then reached a huge city which was about to be built. Entering it, they found 3 palaces of exceeding beauty. Of them 2 had not been built at all, and the third had no walls. They entered the palaces and found 3 golden plates. 2 of them had been broken into 2, and the third had been pulverized. They took hold of the one which had been pulverized. They took 99 minus 100 grains of rice and cooked it. They then invited 3 holy men to be their guests. Of them 2 had no body and the third had no mouth. After these holy men had eaten the food, the 3 princes partook of the rest of the food cooked. They were greatly pleased. Thus they lived in that city for a long, long time in peace and joy. My child, this is an extremely beautiful legend. Pray remember this always, and you will grow up into a learned man. O Rama, when the little boy heard this, he was thrilled. What is known as the creation of the world is no more real than this story of the young boy. The world is nothing but pure hallucination. It is nothing more than an idea. In the infinite consciousness, the idea of the creation arose, and that is what is. O Rama, this world is nothing more than an idea. All the objects of consciousness in this world are just an idea. Reject the air, dirt of ideation, and be free of ideas. Remain rooted in truth and attain peace. Only a fool, not a wise man, is deluded by his own ideas. It is a fool who thinks that the imperishable is perishable and gets deluded. Egotism is but an idea based on a false association of the self with the physical elements. When one alone exists in all this as the infinite consciousness, how has what is called egotism arisen? In fact, this egotism does not exist any more than water exists in the mirage. Therefore, Rama, abandon your imperfect vision which is not based on fact. Rest in the pure vision which is of the nature of bliss and which is based on truth. Inquire into the nature of truth. Abandon falsehood. You are ever free. Why do you call yourself bound and then grieve? The self is infinite. Why, how, and by whom is it bound? There is no division in the self, for the absolute Brahman is all this. What then is called bondage, and what is liberation? It is only in a state of ignorance that you think you experience pain, though you are untouched by pain. These things do not exist in the self. Let the body fall or rise, or let it go on to another universe. I am not confined to a body. Then how am I affected by all this? The relation between the body and the self is like the relation between the cloud and the wind, like the relation between a lotus and the bee. When the cloud is dispersed, the wind becomes one with space. When the lotus withers, the bee flies away into the sky. The self is not destroyed when the body falls. Even the mind does not cease to be until it is burnt in the fire of self-knowledge, not to mention the self. Death is but the veiling by time and space of the ever-present self. Only foolish people fear death. Abandon your latent tendencies even as a bird wishing to fly into the sky breaks out of its shell. Born of ignorance, these tendencies are hard to destroy and they give birth to endless sorrow. It is this ignorant, self-limiting tendency of the mind that views the infinite as the finite. However, even as the sun dispels mist, inquiry into the nature of the self dispels this ignorant, self-limiting tendency. In fact, the very desire to undertake this inquiry is able to bring about a change. Austerities and such other practices are of no use in this. When the mind is purified of its past by the arising of wisdom, it abandons its previous tendencies. The mind seeks the self only in order to dissolve itself in the self. This indeed is in the very nature of the mind. This is the supreme goal, Rama. Strive for this. At this stage, another day came to a close. Having manifested in the infinite consciousness, the mind has by its own nature spread itself out. By its nature again it makes the long appear short and vice versa, and makes one's own appear to be different and vice versa. Even a little thing which it touches is magnified and makes its own. In the twinkling of an eye it creates countless words, and in the twinkling of an eye it destroys them. Even as an able actor plays several roles one after the other, the mind assumes several aspects one after the other. It makes the unreal appear as real and vice versa, and on account of this it seems to enjoy and to suffer. Even that which it gets naturally it grabs with hands and feet, and as a result of this false sense of ownership, it suffers the consequences. Time, as changing seasons, is able indirectly to bring about changes in the trees and plants. Even so, the mind makes one thing appear to be another by its powers of thought and ideation. Therefore, even time and space and all things are under the control of the mind. Depending upon its intensity or dullness, and upon the size, big or small, of the object created or influenced, the mind does what is to be done with some delay or much later. It is not capable of doing anything whatsoever. The Story of Lavana. Pray, O Rama, listen to another interesting legend to illustrate this. In a country known as Uttara Pandava, in whose forest sages dwelt and whose villages were beautiful and prosperous, there reigned a king known as Lavana, who was a descendant of the famous King Harishchandra. He was righteous, noble, chivalrous, charitable, and in every way a worthy king. His enemies had all been conquered, and their followers could not even think of him without becoming feverish with anxiety. One day this king went to his court and ascended the throne. After all the ministers and others had paid their homage to him, a juggler entered the court and saluted him. He said to the king, "I shall show you something wonderful." As he waved a bunch of peacock feathers, there entered into the court a cavalier leading an exquisitely beautiful horse. He requested the king to accept it as a gift. The juggler requested the king to ride that horse and roam freely throughout the world. The king also saw the horse. Thereupon the king closed his eyes and sat motionless. Seeing this, everyone assembled in the court became silent. Absolute peace reigned in the court, as no one dared to disturb the king's peace. Rama, after some time the king opened his eyes and began to tremble as if in fear. As he was about to fall down, the ministers supported him. Dismayed to see them, the king asked, "Who are you, and what are you doing to me?" The worried ministers said to him, "Lord, you are a mighty king of great wisdom, and yet this delusion has overpowered you. What has happened to your mind? Only they who are attached to the little objects of this world and the false relationships of wife, children, etc., are subject to mental aberrations, not one like you devoted to the Supreme. Moreover, only he who has cultivated wisdom is adversely affected by spells, drugs, etc., not one whose mind is fully developed." Hearing this, the king partly regained his composure, though upon looking at the juggler he trembled as if in fear and said to him, "O magician, what have you done to me? You have spread a net of illusion over me. Truly, even the wise are overpowered by the jugglery of Maya. Even though still in this body, within a short period I experienced wonderful hallucinations." Turning to the members of the court, the king recounted his experiences during the previous hour. As soon as I saw this juggler wave his bundle of peacock feathers, I jumped on the horse which stood in front of me and experienced a slight mental delusion. Then I went away on a hunting expedition. The horse led me into an arid desert where nothing lived, nothing grew, where there was no water and it was bitterly cold. I experienced great grief. I spent the whole day there. Later, riding that horse again, I crossed that desert and reached another, which was less dreadful. I rested under a tree. The horse ran away. I rested for some time, and the sun set. Frightened, I hid myself in a bush. The night was longer than an epoch. The day dawned, the sun rose. A little later I saw a dark girl clad in black clothes carrying a plate full of food. I approached her and begged for the food. I was hungry. She ignored me. I pursued her. At last she said, "I shall give you food if you consent to marry me." I consented. Survival was the first and foremost consideration then. She gave me food and later introduced me to her father, who was even more dreadful to look at. Soon the three of us reached their village, which was flowing with blood and flesh. I was introduced to all as that girl's husband. I was treated by them with great respect. They entertained me with dreadful stories which were a source of pain. At a diabolical ceremony, I got married to that girl. Very soon I had become a member of the primitive tribe. My wife gave birth to a daughter, the source of more unhappiness to me. In course of time, 3 more babies arrived. I had become a family man in that tribe. I spent many years among this tribe, suffering the agonies of a family man with a wife and children to feed and protect. I cut firewood, and often I had to sleep under a tree at night. When the weather became cold, I hid myself in a bush in order to keep warm. Pork was my staple diet. Time rolled on, and I became old. I began to trade in meat. I took the meat to the villages on the Vindhya mountains and sold the best part of it there. What could not thus be sold at a decent profit, I cut up into bits and dried in a terribly filthy place. When I was afflicted with hunger, I would often fight with others in the tribe for a piece of meat to eat. My body had become black as soot. Thus engaged in sinful activities, my mind had also become inclined towards sin. Good thoughts and feelings had taken leave of me. My heart had shed all compassion, even as a snake sheds its slough. With nets and other traps and weapons, I caused untold hardship to birds and animals. Clad only in a loincloth, I endured every inclemency of the weather. Thus I spent 7 years, bound by the ropes of evil tendencies. I grew wild with anger and used abusive words, wept in misfortunes, and ate rotten food. Thus I lived for a long time in that place. I drifted like a dry leaf in the wind, as if my only mission in life was eating. There was a drought in the land. The air was so hot that it seemed to waft sparks of flame. The forest caught alight. Only ashes remained. People were dying of hunger. People chased after mirages, thinking there was water. They mistook pebbles to be balls of meat and began to chew them. Some had even begun to eat corpses. Some, while doing so, even chewed their own fingers, which had been soaked in the blood of those dead bodies. Such was their demented state of starvation. What was once a flourishing forest had been transformed into a huge crematorium. What was once a pleasure grove resounded with the agonized cries of the dying. Thus afflicted by famine, many people left the country and migrated elsewhere. Some others, deeply attached to their wives and children, perished in that land. Many others were killed by wild animals. I too left that country to go away along with my wife and children. At the border of the country I found the cool shade of a tree tempting, and after putting down the little children I was carrying on my shoulders, I rested under that tree. for a long time. The youngest of my children was quite small and innocent, and therefore was the dearest to my heart. With tears in his eyes, he demanded food. Although I told him that there was no meat to eat, in his childish innocence he persisted in his demand, unable to bear his hunger. I said to him in despair, "All right, eat my flesh." The innocent child said without thinking, "Give me." I was moved by attachment and pity. I saw that the child was unable to endure the pangs of hunger any more. I decided that the best way to end all these miseries was to end my life. I raised a pyre with the help of the timber I found nearby, and as I ascended that pyre, I shuddered, and I found myself in this court, being held and greeted by all of you. As the king said this, the juggler vanished. The ministers, "Lord, he cannot be a juggler, for he was not interested in money and a reward. Surely some divine entity wished to demonstrate to you and to all of us the power of cosmic illusion. From all this it is clear that this world appearance is nothing but the play of the mind. The mind itself is but the play of the omnipotent infinite being. This mind is able to fool even men of great wisdom. Else where is the king, who is well versed in all branches of learning, and where is this bewildering delusion? Surely this is not a juggler's trick, for a juggler performs for material gain. It is really the power of illusion. Hence the juggler vanished without looking for a reward." Vasishta spoke, "Rama, I was there in that court at that time, and so I know all this firsthand. In this manner the mind veils the real nature of the self, and creates an illusory appearance with many branches, flowers, and fruits. Destroy this illusion by wisdom, and rest in peace. The impure mind sees a ghost where there is just a post, and pollutes all relationships, creating suspicion among friends and making enemies of them, even as a drunken man sees that the world is revolving around him. A distressed mind turns food into poison and causes disease and death. The impure mind, laden with tendencies, is the cause for delusions, manias, and phobias. One should strive to uproot these and discard them. What is man but the mind? Mind is the whole world. Mind is the atmosphere. Mind is the sky. Mind is earth. Mind is wind. And mind is great. Only he whose mind is foolish is called a fool. When the body loses its intelligence, for example in death, the corpse is not said to be foolish. Mind decides the length of time. The King Lavana experienced the period of less than an hour as if it extended to a lifetime. What is more mysterious, Rama, than that the mind is able to veil the omnipresent, pure, eternal, and infinite consciousness, making you confuse it with this inert physical body? The mind itself appears as wind in the moving element, luster in the lustrous, solidity in earth, and void in the space. If the mind is elsewhere, the taste of food that is being eaten is not really experienced. If the mind is elsewhere, one does not see what is right in front of oneself. The senses are born of the mind, but not the other way round. It is only from the point of view of fools that the body and the mind are said to be quite different. In fact, they are non-different, being mind alone. Salutations to those sages who have actually realized this truth. The sage who has realized this is not disturbed, even if the body is embraced by a woman. To him, it is like a piece of wood coming into contact with the body. Even if his arms are cut off, he does not experience it. He is able to convert all sorrow into bliss. Just as an actor is able to portray in himself the character of different personalities, the mind is able to create different states of consciousness, like waking and dreaming. How mysterious is the mind which is able to make the King Lavana feel that he is a primitive tribesman. The mind experiences what it itself constructs. The mind is nothing but what has been put together by thought. Knowing this, do as you please. He who does not allow his mind to roam in objects of pleasure is able to master it, even as one who is bound to a pillar does not move. The mind of a nobleman does not move from the reality. He alone is a human being. The others are worms. He attains to the Supreme Being by constant meditation. Victory over this goblin known as mind is gained when, with the aid of one's own self-effort, one attains self-knowledge and abandons the craving for what the mind desires as pleasure. This can easily be achieved without any effort at all, even as a child's attention can be easily diverted by the cultivation of the proper attitude. Woe unto him who is unable to give up cravings, for this is the sole means to one's ultimate good. By intense effort, it is possible to gain victory over the mind. Then, without the least effort, the individualized consciousness is absorbed in infinite consciousness when its individuality is broken through. This is easy and is easily accomplished. They who are unable to do this are indeed vultures in human form. Abandon your reliance on fate or gods created by dull-witted people, and by self-effort and self-knowledge, make the mind no mind. Let the infinite consciousness swallow, as it were, the infinite mind, and then go beyond everything. With your intelligence united with the Supreme, hold on to the Self, which is imperishable. When the mind is thus conquered by remaining completely unagitated, you will consider even the conquest of the three worlds worthless. This does not involve studying the scriptures, or rising or falling, nothing but self-knowledge. Why do you consider it difficult? If this is found difficult by someone, how does he even live in this world without self-knowledge? One who knows the deathless nature of the self is not afraid of death, nor is he affected by separation from friends and relations. The feelings, this and I, and this and mine, are the mind. When they are removed, the mind ceases to be. Then one becomes fearless. Weapons like swords generate fear. The weapon, wisdom, that destroys egotism generates fearlessness. Towards whichever object the mind flows with intensity, in that it sees the fulfillment of its craving. Of course, there is no mind without restlessness. Restlessness is the very nature of the mind. It is the work of this restlessness of the mind based on the infinite consciousness that appears as this world. O Rama, that indeed is the power of the mind. But when the mind is deprived of its restlessness, it is referred to as the dead mind, and that itself is penance, tapas, as also the verification of the scriptures and liberation. O Rama, mind constantly swings like a pendulum between the reality and the appearance, between consciousness and inertness. When the mind contemplates inert objects for a considerable time, it assumes the characteristics of such inertness. When the same mind is devoted to inquiry and wisdom, it shakes off all conditioning and returns to its original nature as pure consciousness. The psychological tendency, or mental disposition or mental conditioning, is unreal, yet it does arise in the mind. The product of ignorance is real only to the ignorant person. To the wise, it is just a verbal expression, just as one speaks of the barren woman's son. Do not remain ignorant, O Rama, but strive to be wise by renouncing mental conditioning. You are not the doer of any action here, O Rama, so why do you assume doership? When one alone exists, who does what and how? Do not become inactive either, for what is gained by doing nothing? What has to be done has to be done. Therefore rest in the self. Even while doing all the actions natural to you, if you are unattached to those actions, you are truly the non-doer. If you are doing nothing and are attached to that non-doership, then you are doing nothing and you become the doer. When all this world is like the juggler's trick, which is to be given up, and what is to be sought? The seed of this world appearance is ignorance. This ignorance or mental conditioning is acquired by man effortlessly, and it seems to promote pleasure. But in truth, it is the giver of grief. It creates a delusion of pleasure only by the total veiling of self-knowledge. Thus it was able to make the King Lavana experience less than an hour as if it were of several years' duration. This ignorance or mental conditioning has but a momentary existence, yet since it flows on, it seems to be permanent like a river. Because it is able to veil the reality, it seems to be real. But when you try to grasp it, you discover it is nothing. Yet again it acquires strength and firmness on account of these qualities in the world appearance, even as a flimsy fiber when rolled into a rope acquires great strength. This conditioning seems to grow, but in fact it does not. For when you try to grasp it, it vanishes like the tip of a flame. Yet again, even as the sky appears to be blue, this conditioning also seems to have some kind of real appearance. It is born as the second moon in diplopia. It exists like the dream objects, and it creates confusion even as people sitting in a moving boat see the shore moving. When it is active, it creates a delusion of the long dream of world appearance. It perverts all relationships and experiences. It is this ignorance or mental conditioning that throws up an endless stream of creation and perception of duality and of division and the consequent confusion of perception and experience. When this ignorance or mental conditioning is mastered by becoming aware of its unreality, mind ceases to be, even as when the water ceases to flow, the river dries up. O Rama, even as darkness disappears as you turn towards light, ignorance disappears if you turn towards the light of the self. As long as there does not arise a natural yearning for self-knowledge, so long ignorance or mental conditioning throws up an endless stream of world appearance. Even as a shadow vanishes when it turns to see the light, this ignorance perishes when it turns toward self-knowledge. O Rama, from Brahma the Creator down to the blade of a grass, all this is nothing but the self. Ignorance is non-existent unreality. There is no second thing here known as the mind. In that self itself, the veil that is also of itself floats, creating the polarization of subject-object. And infinite consciousness itself is then known as the mind. This veil is an idea, an intention, or a thought in that infinite consciousness. Mind is born of this idea or thought, and mind has to vanish with the help of an idea or thought, i.e., by the coming to an end of the idea or thought. The firm conviction that I am not the absolute Brahman binds the mind. The mind is liberated by the firm conviction everything is the absolute Brahman. Ideas and thoughts are bondage, and their coming to an end is liberation. Therefore be free of them and do whatever has to be done spontaneously. Even as thought or idea sees blueness in the sky, the mind sees the world as real. He who does not let his mind dwell on such thoughts and ideas by striving to be conscious of the self enjoys peace. That which was not in the beginning does not exist even now. That which was and therefore is now is the absolute Brahman. Contemplation of this bestows peace, for that Brahman is peace. One should not contemplate anything else at any time and in any manner anywhere. One should uproot the very hope of enjoyment with one's utmost strength and using one's utmost intelligence. Hopes and attachments seem to ramify on account of mental conditioning, which is ignorance. In this empty physical body, where it is, that is called I. In truth, Rama, I, mine, etc., have no existence at all. The one self alone is the true at all times. Is it not a great wonder, O Rama, that people forget the truth that the absolute Brahman alone is, and are convinced of the existence of the unreal and non-existent ignorance? Rama, do not let the foolish idea of the existence of ignorance take root in you, for if the consciousness is thus polluted, it invites endless suffering. Though it is unreal, it can cause real suffering. It is on account of ignorance that illusions like a mirage exist, and that one sees various visions and hallucinations, like flying in the air and flying in space, and one experiences heaven and hell. Therefore, O Rama, give up mental conditioning which alone is responsible for the perception of duality, and remain totally unconditioned. Then you will attain incomparable preeminence over all. Rama asked, Holy sage, it is indeed incredible that this non-existent nescience creates such an illusion that this non-existent world appears to be very real. Pray explain to me further how this is possible. Also, please tell me why the King Lavana underwent all sorts of sufferings. Please tell me who or what it is that experiences all these sufferings. Oh, Rama, it is not really true that consciousness is in any way related to this body. The body has only been fancied by the consciousness as if in a dream. When consciousness, clothed as it were by its own energy, limits itself and considers itself jiva, that jiva, endowed with this restless energy, is involved in this world appearance. The embodied being who enjoys or suffers the fruits of past actions and who dons a variety of bodies is known as egotism, mind, and also jiva. Neither the body nor the enlightened being undergoes suffering. It is only the ignorant mind that suffers. It is only in a state of ignorance, like sleep, that the mind dreams of the world appearance, not when it is awake or enlightened. Hence, the embodied being that undergoes suffering here is variously known as the mind, ignorance, jiva, and mental conditioning, as also the individualized consciousness. The body is intent, and hence can neither enjoy nor suffer. Nescience gives rise to heedlessness and unwisdom. Hence it is nescience alone that enjoys or suffers. It is indeed the mind alone that is born, weeps, kills, goes, abuses others, etc., not the body. In all the experiences of happiness and unhappiness, as also in all the hallucinations and imaginations, it is mind that does everything, and it is mind that experiences all this. Mind is man. I shall narrate to you the reason for the sufferings of the King Lavana. Lavana was a descendant of Harishchandra. Lavana thought, "My grandfather performed a great religious rite and became a great man. I should also perform the same rite." He gathered the necessary materials and the religious men, and he performed the rite mentally for a whole year while sitting in his own garden. Since he had thus successfully completed the religious rite performed mentally, he was entitled to its fruits. O Rama, thus you see that mind alone is the performer of all actions, and hence it is also the experiencer of all happiness and unhappiness. Therefore, guide your mind along the path to salvation, Rama. I myself was a witness to the scene in King Lavana's court, and when they wished to know who that juggler was after he had abruptly disappeared from the court, I saw his identity through my subtle vision and found that he was a messenger of the gods. It is the tradition that Indra would send all sorts of afflictions to test the strength of anyone who engaged himself in that particular religious rite which Lavana was performing mentally. The hallucinations he had were the result. The rite was performed by the mind, and the hallucinations were experienced by the mind. When the same mind is thoroughly purified, you will get rid of all duality and diversity which it creates. Rama, I have already narrated to you the process of cyclical creation after the previous cosmic dissolution, and of how one comes to entertain the false notions of I and mine. Equipped with wisdom, he who gradually ascends the 7 steps to perfection in yoga attains liberation from these. Holy Sir, what are the 7 steps you have referred to? O Rama, there are 7 descending steps of ignorance, and there are 7 ascending steps of wisdom. I shall now describe them to you. To remain established in self-knowledge is liberation. When this is disturbed, there arise egotism and bondage. The state of self-knowledge is that in which there is no mental agitation, neither distraction nor dullness of mind, neither egotism nor perception of diversity. The delusion that veils this self-knowledge is 7-fold. Seed state of wakefulness, wakefulness, great wakefulness, wakeful dream, dream wakefulness, and sleep. In pure consciousness, when mind and jiva exist only in name, it is the seed state of wakefulness. When notions of I and this arise, it is known as wakefulness. When these notions get strengthened by the memory of previous incarnations, it is great wakefulness. When the mind is fully awake to its own fancies and is filled with them, it is wakeful dream. The false notions of experiences during sleep which yet appear to be real are dreams. In the dream wakeful state, one recalls past experiences as if they are real now. When these are abandoned in favor of total inert dullness, it is sleep. These 7 have their own innumerable subdivisions. I shall now describe to you, O Rama, the 7 states or planes of wisdom. Knowing them, you will not be caught in delusion. Pure wish or intention is the first. Inquiry is the second. The third is when the mind becomes subtle. Establishment in truth is the fourth. Total freedom from attachment or bondage is the fifth. The sixth is cessation of objectivity. And the 7th is beyond all these. Why do I continue to be a fool? I shall seek holy men and scriptures having cultivated dispassion. Such a wish is the first state, whereupon one engages in the practice of inquiry, direct observation. With all these, there arises non-attachment, and the mind becomes subtle and transparent. This is the third state. When these three are practiced, there arises in the seeker a natural turning away from sense pleasures, and there is natural dwelling in truth. This is the fourth state. When all these are well practiced, there is total non-attachment and at the same time a conviction in the nature of truth. This is the fifth state. Then one rejoices in one's own self. The perception of duality and diversity both within oneself and outside oneself ceases, and the efforts that one made at the inspiration of others bears fruition in direct spiritual experience. After this, there is no other support, no division, no diversity, and self-knowledge is spontaneous, natural, and therefore unbroken. This is the seventh transcendental state. This is the state of one who is liberated while living here. Beyond this is the state of one who has transcended even the body, Turiyatita. Rama, all these great ones who ascend these seven planes of wisdom are holy men. They are liberated and they do not fall into the mire of happiness and unhappiness. They may or may not work or be active. They rejoice in the self and do not stand in need of others to make them happy. The highest state of consciousness can be attained by all, even by animals and by primitive men, by those who have a body and even by disembodied beings, for it involves only the rise of wisdom. They who have reached the highest planes of consciousness are indeed great men. They are adorable. Even an emperor is like a worthless blade of grass compared to them, for they are liberated here and now. The self ignorantly imagines an egotistic existence, even as gold, forgetting its goldness, might think it is a ring, and weep and wail, "Alas, I have lost my goldness." Holy Sir, how can this ignorance and egotism arise in the self? Rama, one should ask questions concerning the reality only, not concerning the unreal. Neither goldness, ringness, nor limited egotism exists in truth. When the goldsmith sells the ring, he weighs out the gold for its gold. If one were to discuss the existence of the ringness in the ring, and the infinite form in the infinite consciousness, then one has to compare it with the barren woman's son. The existence of the unreal is unreal. It arises in ignorance and vanishes when inquired into. In ignorance one sees silver in the mother of pearl, but it cannot serve as silver even for a moment. As long as the truth that it is mother of pearl is not seen, the ignorance lasts, even as one cannot extract oil from sand, and even as one can obtain only gold from the ring. There are no two things here in this universe. The one infinite consciousness alone shines in all names and forms. Such indeed is the nature of this utter ignorance, this delusion, and this world process. Without real existence, there is this illusory notion of egotism. This egotism does not exist in the infinite self. In the infinite self there is no creator, no creation, no worlds, no heaven, no humans, no demons, no bodies, no elements, no time, no existence, and no destruction. No you, no I, no self, no that, no truth, no falsehood, none of these. No notion of diversity, no contemplation, and no enjoyment. Whatever is and is known as the universe is that supreme peace. There is no beginning, no middle, and no end. All is, all at all times, beyond the comprehension of the mind and speech. There is no creation. The infinite has never abandoned its infinity. That has never become like this. It is like the ocean, but without ocean's movement. It is self-luminous, like the sun, but without activity. In ignorance, the Supreme Being is viewed as the object, as the world. Even as space exists in space, one with space, even so what appears to be creation is Brahman existing in Brahman as Brahman. The notions of far and near, of diversity, of here and there, are as valid as the distance between two objects in a mirror in which a whole city is reflected. The day after his hallucination experience, King Lavana thought, I should actually go to those places that I saw in the vision. Perhaps they exist in reality. Immediately, he set out with his retinue and proceeded in a southerly direction. Soon he came across the very scenes of his vision and the type of people whom he had seen then. He met the very people whom he knew during his existence as a tribesman. He even saw his own destitute children. He saw there an old woman who was weeping and screaming in agony. "Oh, my beloved husband, where have you gone, leaving us all here? I have lost my beautiful daughter who had an extraordinary stroke of luck to obtain a handsome king for a husband. Where have they all gone? Alas, I have lost all of them." The king approached her, consoled her, and learned from her that she was indeed the mother of his tribal wife. Out of compassion, he gave them enough wealth to meet their needs and to help them out of the drought that had stricken the whole countryside, even as he had seen it the day before. He dwelt among them for some time and then returned to his palace. The next morning the king asked me to explain the mystery and was fully satisfied with my answer. O Rama, thus the power of nescience is capable of creating a total confusion between the real and the unreal. O sage, this is indeed puzzling. How can that which was seen in a dream or a hallucination be also experienced in the reality of the waking state? But, O Rama, all this is ignorance. The notions of far and near, a moment and eternity, are all hallucinations. In ignorance, the real appears to be unreal, and the unreal seems to be real. The individualized consciousness perceives what it thinks it perceives, on account of its conditioning. On account of ignorance, when the notion of egotism arises, at that very moment the delusion of the beginning, a middle, and an end also arises. One who is thus deluded thinks that he is an animal and experiences this. All this happens on account of accidental coincidence, just as a crow flies towards a coconut palm, and as it alights on the tree, a fruit falls down as if the crow dislodged it, though in fact the crow did not. Similarly, by pure coincidence and in ignorance, the unreal seems to be real. In his hypnotic state, the King Lavana obviously saw reflected in his own consciousness the marriage of a prince with the tribal woman, and he experienced it as if it had happened to him. A man forgets what he did earlier in his life, even if at that time he had devoted a lot of time and energy to that action. Even so, he now thinks that he did not do what he actually did. Such discrepancies in memory are often seen, even as one sometimes dreams of a past incident as if it happens now. Lavana experienced in his vision some past incident connected with the tribesmen. It is possible that the people in the forest on the slopes of the Vindhya experienced in their own minds the visions that appeared in the consciousness of Lavana. It is also possible that Lavana and the tribesmen saw in their minds whatever was experienced by the other. These hallucinations become reality when experienced by many, even as a statement made by very many people is accepted as true. When these are incorporated into one's life, they acquire their own reality. After all, what is the truth concerning the things of this world, except how they are experienced in one's own consciousness? Nescience is not a real entity, even as oil and sand is not a real entity. Nescience in the self cannot have any relationship, for there can be relationship only between same or similar entities. This is obvious in everyone's experience. Thus, it is only because consciousness is infinite that everything in the universe becomes knowable. It is not as if the subject illumines the object, which has no luminosity of its own, but since consciousness is all this, everything is self-luminous. Without requiring a perceiving intelligence, it is by the action of consciousness becoming aware of itself that intelligence manifests itself, not when consciousness apprehends an inert object. It is not correct to say that there is a mixture in this universe of the sentient and the inert, for they do not mix. All things are full of consciousness, and when this consciousness comprehends itself, there is knowledge. One may see a relationship between a tree and a rock, though they appear to be inert. Such relationship exists in their fundamental constituents, which have undergone a certain kind of change to become a tree and a rock. This is also seen in the sense of taste. The taste buds in the tongue respond to the taste in the food because of their similarity in constitution. All relationship is therefore the realization of the already existing unity. It is regarded as relationship only because of the previous false and deluded assumption of a division into subject and object. In the middle, between the sight and the seen, there is a relationship which is known as the seer. When the division between the seer and the sight and the seen is abolished, that is the supreme. When the mind travels from one country to another, between them is cosmic intelligence. Be that always. Even as you do not busy yourself with the affairs of a future village, do not get tangled with the moods of your mind, but be established in truth. Regard the mind as a foreigner or a piece of wood or stone. There is no mind in infinite consciousness. That which is done by this non-existent mind is also unreal. Be established in this realization. I have investigated the truth concerning the mind for a very long time, O Rama, and have found none. Only infinite consciousness exists. This seemingly endless stream of ignorance can be crossed over only by the constant company of holy ones. From such company there arises wisdom concerning what is worth seeking and what is to be avoided. Then there arises the pure wish to attain liberation. This leads to serious inquiry. Then the mind becomes subtle, because this inquiry thins out the mental conditioning. As a result of the rising of pure wisdom, one's consciousness moves in the reality. Then the mental conditioning vanishes, and there is non-attachment. Bondage to actions and their fruits ceases. The vision is firmly established in truth, and the apprehension of the unreal is weakened. Even while living and functioning in this world, he who has this unconditioned vision does what has to be done as if he is asleep, without thinking of the world and its pleasures. After some years of living like this, one is fully liberated and transcends all these states. He is liberated while living. When mental conditioning is overcome and the mind is made perfectly tranquil, the illusion that deludes the ignorant comes to an end. It is only as long as this illusion Maya is not clearly understood that it generates this great delusion. Once it is clearly understood, it is seen as the infinite, and it becomes the source of happiness and the realization of the absolute Brahman. It is only for the sake of scriptural instruction that one speaks of the self, Brahman, etc., but in truth one alone is. It is pure consciousness, not embodied being. It is, whether one knows or not, whether one is embodied or without a body. All the unhappiness you see in this world belongs to the body. The self which is not grasped by the senses is not touched by sorrow. In the self there is no desire. The world appears in it without any wish or intention on its part. Thus, O Rama, through my precepts, the false notion of a creation and its existence has been dispelled. Your consciousness has become pure, devoid of duality.